Well, good morning to you all. I know most of you, I'm sure. Phil Quanbeck II here. It's Wednesday morning. This is a gathering intended to help keep you all informed and engaged with what's going on at Augsburg. And the guest speaker today, or the primary speakers, are Paul Pribbenow, president, and Karen Kaivola, the provost. And so they're going to give you updates and let you know what's going on with the college. And I'm supposed to share a couple of memories. I'm going to give two. One, I first appeared on the Augsburg campus in the fall of 1957. I was not a faculty member at that time. I was a 5-year-old child of a faculty member, and there were a few of us faculty kids still on the faculty until Stu Anderson would be another in physics. And back then there was no, the library was in Sverdrup Hall, and there was no campus Christensen Center. And in fact, Bernard Christensen was in fact the president of the college and the seminary. And the cafeteria was in the basement of Memorial Hall, and Memorial Hall was a men's dorm. And it was a very different place than what you see now. The second memory I thought I would share, and maybe some of you will get this, is when I first arrived on campus when Dad retired in 1993, I took over his course called Jesus and His Interpreters. And I still taught that just this spring. And I used to use a clip from The Greatest Story Ever Told, if you remember that film. And the clip was John Wayne in his cameo role as the centurion at the cross, whose one line in the whole movie is, "Truly, this was the Son of God." And back in 1993, you play that clip and you got laughter in the classroom. If you play the whole clip now, there is no response because they don't know who John Wayne was. And you have to explain a bit of American film history. So that's a big change in terms of how you read an audience. And one final vignette I thought I'd share is this spring in Religion 100, I was using trees as kind of a metaphor, kind of a cross interfaith discussion. And it led to a wonderful discussion with Muslim students who brought up Surah 19 of the Quran, and how a palm tree provides its fruit to the Virgin Mary, who plays a significant role in the Quran, people know, and we compared and contrasted that with the Gospel of Luke and how Mary is presented there. So that's something a discussion I would never have imagined when I started at Augsburg. And I thought it was just so engaging. And so here we're Muslim students, Christian students, nuns, N-O-N-E-S, not habited nuns. And so they were talking, we talked about the significance of Mary in Islam and Christianity. Again, I would never have imagined I would have been in that place. I knew nothing about that comparison in 1993. And it's been part of the change at Augsburg that we can have an interfaith discussion like that and really be engaged in so many aspects of that. So I'm at the end of my informal remarks. Is President Pripanow available?
I am here, Phil.
Okay, well, I will give you the lead in. So we're going to have Provost Karen Kaivola. And now let me present President Paul Pribbenow.
Yeah, you sound like my son I walk into the Christensen Center and he's over at Einstein's and he announces the president is in the room and I'm don't need that kind of visibility. Well, thank you, Phil. Your stories really hit me because I'm just coming off a call. I received a grant last fall to undertake a project called Interrogating Our Institutional Saga. And there are 12 of us, faculty, staff, students, who now meet monthly. And the whole point is that we are going back into our history, both from an appreciative standpoint, but also sometimes with a critical eye to think about the threads that have come to, sorry, my dogs, how in fact got a lot of excitement here at home. So sorry, it's a problem of working at home. Is to think a little bit about how we can, in fact, learn from that past about who we are and where we're going. And so 2 years from now, when the project's over, there will actually be a set of essays written by members of this group that will point to how that history informs where we go. So Phil's point about his current class certainly is an illustration of how those threads come together in new and interesting ways. So thanks for this time with you. This is the first of a series of these On the Horizon events that we intend to do over the next couple of months to bring various groups of folks kind of up to speed on what's going on at Augsburg. So we can go to the next slide, TJ, and let me just offer a few kind of updates on things, and then I'm going to turn it over to Karen to share some of her work. One of the ways we've been thinking about kind of where we stand at the moment in this kind of just wild, unsettling times that we've been in over the past 15 months is to start to think about the arc of the work. So if we go back to last spring and March 15th or whatever it was when we made the decision to pivot completely to online, to send all of our students home. Everything was focused on just getting through the spring semester and getting our students on their way, which we did. And then we started immediately to think about, in fact, what 2021 was going to look like. And so spent the whole summer getting ready for that. Faculty redesigned their courses. We moved almost everything into kind of virtual spaces. We had to think about all the protocols on campus and who could be on campus or not, all the working from home and all of that planning, which went on during the summer. We launched the school year. We did some events on campus, small events and things that we were able to do outside, but we kind of settled into a pattern. And overall, it was a year where I think we were able to keep each other safe for the most part. Certainly we had our outbreaks in certain areas, but quickly stepped in and were able to respond to the virus. Of course, we had in the fall, we had about 750 students living on campus. By the time we got to the spring, we had about 600. So many of them had decided that they might as well go home if they were going to take all their courses online. But again, we kept really responding to the challenges that came up, the changing landscape, the different kind of public health news that we were getting, when the vaccine started to float up, and when folks were thinking about that, testing protocols that were put in place. We did lots of testing events on campus. Just trying to keep our eye on getting through the year safely, and then of course you layer on all of the racial unrest and kind of continuing economic disruptions that people were facing. But we end this year, and I think you'll hear from Karen, with a foundation that's quite strong in terms of work that we did that was really grounded in our strategic plan, which had been adopted by the board back in October of 2019, and for me, being able to see that plan as a framework that allowed us to get to this point, then to think about what this next year is going to mean. And I really see this next year as still its transition. We're going to come back in the fall, and certainly we've made it a priority to think about students having more face-to-face classes, certainly not all of their classes face-to-face, but more face-to-face classes, having opportunities to be together safely, on campus in student groups and the like, getting back to kind of regular student athletic activities. But we still know it's going to be a hybrid. There's just no doubt that that's still going to be a case, at least in the fall. So how do we think about this as an on-ramp to sustainable growth for the following year? And that's really what this next year is going to allow us to do. Now, I will just tell you, because people ask this question, we received a significant amount of money through the CARES and HERF acts that were passed by the federal government. There have now been 3 of those. And overall, Augsburg received about it's totaling about $16 million between the 3 different relief acts. A good chunk of that went directly to students, but another portion of it was really allowed us to make up for lost revenue and for extra expenses. So we give thanks for that, and that has actually allowed us to end each of the 2020. We will end 2021, and we have a budget for 2022 that in fact meets our budget targets. And so we're very grateful for that. But we can go to the next slide. And I just want to remind folks that, again, this work was done in the context of Augsburg 150, our sesquicentennial strategic plan. And I always point to that vision statement, which was written, back in the spring of 2019, probably when we were first putting this together, and to say that we educate Augies as stewards of an inclusive democracy, engaged in their communities, and uniquely equipped to navigate the complex issues of our time. And how could we ask for more kind of combination of complex issues of our time as our students who now graduate into this world will face. And so in many ways that vision statement more relevant, more resonant than ever. And then in particular, look at what we said about the kind of key strategies, so strengthening our three-dimensional education, advancing the public purposes of an Augsburg education, which we just celebrated actually at commencement on Monday night. That was the theme for commencement, and we gave 2 honorary degrees in recognition of those 2 initiatives, the anchor institution work as well as the interfaith work. And then to grow as a sustainable university. And it's the third of these, the grow as a sustainable university, that has really become the focus point for the work that Karen's going to describe, that has really been underway for several years, but took particular focus this year and really leads us to a place where we have a kind of framework for and some very concrete initiatives that will really allow us to build a sustainable university into the future. So let's go to the next slide. And just a few comments here about the year. This kind of mosaic of pictures really frames out a lot of the things that were going on campus. We're going all the way back to last summer, where many of us faculty, staff, kind of went out across the cities and the region to deliver these signs to our incoming students since they couldn't come to campus for their SOARs. And that was a great opportunity to make that kind of personal connection. You see pictures there of people that continue to work on campus. Our enrollment services folks were in person. Our admissions people have been in person. You see a lot of the kind of protest work that our students were involved in throughout the year, of course, in response to the George Floyd murder. You also see in the lower left-hand corner that was a Augsburg Bold event that we had out on the quads back in the fall when we were still able to be outside. And then we had student athletics, so we were able to get our student athletes back, and as you know, at an undergraduate level, up to 30% to 40% of our students participate in some form in intercollegiate athletics. And so it was very important to give them a chance to continue to practice as a team and ultimately to have some competition. So you may have noticed that we were actually playing football in April, at least a couple different games, just to give that team a chance to have some competition, even though it was not a full season. So a year unlike any other, but certainly a year also where a lot of creativity and imagination and resilience was shown by members of our community. So next slide, please, TJ. I want to just give you a quick sense of where things stand. As you know, 2 years ago, we had a record-setting class. The actual final number was 636 students that came to us. Last year was our second largest class, where we had somewhere in the range of 550 students who joined us. And as you can see with the deposits as of May 1st, we're actually running ahead, quite significantly ahead of last year, and believe that in fact we will have 600 new first-year undergrads in the class entering in the fall, in addition to about 175 transfer students. So it will be the second largest class in our history, after last year was the second largest. And it continues to show a trend where we're really tuned into the pipelines of students, especially students of color. As you know, we've been 65% students of color in the past 3 years, and that continues to be the trend. And so we have built trustworthy relationships in those communities, and those students come to us because they know that we want them to be successful. So we're very heartened by this. This certainly gives us great hope for the fall. We're a little concerned about housing, I'll be quite honest, because students were able to make other choices this year. We know that sometimes whether moving back into the dorm is something they're going to want to do or not. So as you can see, that's lagging a bit behind the last couple of years, but we're still working hard on trying to get as many students back safely as we can. So, and next slide. So again, just as I set up this then, for Karen is going to talk a little bit about a set of initiatives that she has been a part of over the past year that are part of our efforts to grow as a sustainable university. So Karen.
Okay, thank you, Paul, and good morning, everyone. It's good to be here with you this morning, to see some familiar faces and names, and some of you I know I only know by reputation, but it's good to have you with us as well. And I'm happy to speak sort of briefly to these 3 interconnected and interdependent initiatives, each of which is focused on advancing the work of Augsburg 150, perhaps especially on that last area that Paul called out, focusing on growing as a sustainable university, but certainly have implications for other dimensions of our work as well, and strengthening what we offer our students, our families, and our communities. So TJ, if we could go to the next slide. This slide was used this last week when we gave a version of this presentation to the Board of Regents, and it shows those three areas and links each one to a key sort of dimension of our work. So the Grow Sustainably Task Force, which is the first area that I'll speak to, focused on driving net revenue, but focused on the academic programs. The HLC Quality Initiative is something that Norma and others will know that, of course, we have to do periodically for the HLC. And we focused it in a way on building academic analytics in particular that will help support a culture of learning and results. And finally, the Task Force on Academic Structure, which has come forward late this spring with a recommendation that we move to a two-college structure at Augsburg to support the work of a small, complex university. So the graphic here is intended, and I hope conveys the degree to which those are interconnected initiatives. But I'll talk about each one in a little more detail. So we could go to the next slide, TJ. So the Grow Sustainably Task Force was charged back in November and met through the rest of the year. It was a joint sort of board and campus project. So Regent Jeff Nodland and I were the co-conveners of that work. It included three additional board members, Ann Ashton Piper, John O'Brien, and Jill Thomas. And other faculty and staff who served included Leif Anderson, Bob Groven, Viviana Coe in social work, Dal Little in English. And then we had Joanne Reek and Lauren Causey, who's our grants director, now research grant director. So we picked up essentially where the Financial Headwinds Project left off, identifying the most promising ideas in the community for growing net revenue. And that took us pretty quickly to a focus on academic programs. More specifically, we started with a really long list and we ended up centering on 4 areas. And TJ, I think we need to click probably 4 times here. The first is enhancing our distinction as an inclusive institution for undergraduate students, along the lines of what you've heard both Phil and Paul just mention, but understanding that a lot of our appeal to students now comes from the unique mix of diversity that we have at Augsburg and the opportunity that affords. 2, to improve student retention and success, something that we've talked about certainly for some time. 3, growing and optimizing our graduate enrollment portfolio, both within individual programs and in the overall mix. And finally, redesigning our offerings for working adults, and an initiative that we've called as shorthand, Adult Learning Unbounded, unbounded by geography, modality, or degree options. So we'll just stay on this slide for a bit while I talk a little bit more about our work. So to test our thinking, the group met first with our CFO to better understand the 5-year budget model and the implications of that. We then met with campus leaders who have particular responsibilities in these 4 areas to check our initial ideas and to learn from their ideas and thoughts. And so, of course, we discovered they were already really deep into this work, far deeper than we could ourselves hope to be. So we learned a lot from those conversations. And then we had 2 broader conversations with the community, the first with the Board of Regents and then with the campus community in a focused conversation to invite in the community's wisdom and perspective. And what was interesting is there was actually fairly broad affirmation of these 4 areas. And not only that, but an affirmation that we needed to evolve or transform what we were doing in all of these areas. So that gives us a sort of community authorization and support for refining a path towards achieving these ends. So I'm not sharing it with you today, but you'll probably be able to get access to it in the future if you want to see it. A 1-page grid that summarizes the recommendations of this group. which I, a former English professor, have come to see as a great achievement. To be able to distill something into a one-page document, it represents, I think, simplicity on the other side of complexity, and shows both how deep our thinking got and how we were able, in fact, to distill it to a set of sort of initiatives, goals, campus leaders, metrics, and the metric really is 5% annual growth in net revenue across each of these 4 action areas. That is ambitious enough to make those who are named on this one-page grid a little bit nervous, but we don't think it's unreasonable or impossible. And as somebody who's named on that list, let me just say, it makes me a little nervous too. But I think we need to be a little nervous. We need ambitious goals that will make us a little nervous. I just want to call out a few of the examples of those initiatives so that it's not just abstract. You know, we're working with a group called Art and Science this year to more deeply understand, I would say, both who we are and why students choose us, both of those things in tandem, so that we can think about not changing who we are, but how we communicate who we are to our students. And by the end of this project, we should understand better not just why students choose us, but why some do not, and why some do not stay once they do choose us. So this is a deeper dive into these kinds of issues than anything I've been a part of before at Augsburg or elsewhere. 2, there's a call to, under the second bullet, to become what I would call a culture of retention, just as we have become a culture of equity and inclusion. And what that means is really mobilizing all members of the campus community and understanding that we all share some responsibility in making students feel connected on campus, feel that they belong, positioning them for success. Of course, we can't do everything. We can only do what we can do, and then they have to do their part too. But that's an important piece of this, as is understanding that the first year program is critically important and requires perhaps a more holistic first year program. And I'm thinking that now that I oversee academic and student affairs, not a new alignment at Augsburg, I know, but a return to how Augsburg and other institutions were organized in the past before we moved to this greater specialization of particular offices. But that alignment may help us think about how we design that kind of first year program. And then finally, mobilizing innovation and new programs for working adults. We've struggled with that over the past decade or more. The vision here is to continue with our degree completion programs, but also expand beyond that to think about shorter term credentialing for professionals, say in maybe social work or education or nursing, but a business as well. And shorter term sort of options for continuing education that would bring people into our orbit and advance Augsburg's public mission. That is not the same level of revenue driver, by the way, as the other initiatives, but we think it's important for Augsburg to position itself in that space into the future. And then if we could go to the next slide now, I'll talk a little bit about our Higher Learning Commission Quality Initiative, a multi-year institutional project that is required of us now once every 10 years, sort of in the years prior to and leading up to our next reaffirmation of accreditation, which is in 2024-25. So originally we intended to focus, as many institutions do, on our assessment of student learning. The HLC tends to call out assessment as an area of growth for most institutions, as they have called it out for us. And we thought that would be an appropriate focus. But one of the faculty I was in dialogue with, our director of assessment, Ben Denkinger, in the psychology department, suggested as we were having conversations that actually wouldn't be sufficient to realize the kind of change we think we need to see in assessment. He thought we needed a bigger idea, something broader. And that led that group to a whole different kind of conversation about academic data and analytics more broadly. Something, by the way, that was also, I'm anticipating myself now, but called out as an area of challenge by the group that was looking at academic structure, but we didn't think that changing academic structure alone could touch that. So it was actually fortuitous that we were doing this quality initiative at the same time. So now that quality initiative is actually carrying the weight of assessment, academic data that's to support our decisions across the academic program and our accredited programs as well. And TJ, if we could go to the next slide here. So you see here some of the ideas that are associated with this initiative. We're going to expand our capacity for providing greater support for academic analytics and its integration into institutional planning through our Office of Planning and Effectiveness. That was, in fact, part of the vision for that office from the start. We just haven't mobilized the full vision that we hoped for when we first created that office in 2014. We want to integrate academic analytics and data more effectively into our institutional decision processes and practices. And part of that is the second bullet, our more systematic use of what is visual, intuitive data in academic planning. And that is really, I like to call it a project in democratizing data, because it puts data into the hands of faculty, department chairs, program directors, as well as administration. So we're all sort of looking at the same thing. And I think that also has an advantage of building trust and confidence and making us better partners in these difficult decisions and choices. All of this in some ways is about culture, not just about tools or shiny new tools that give visual data to academic programs. It's really about how we orient ourselves towards the kind of decisions and choices we have in front of us. So you might remember, if you were part of these conversations a few years ago, when we were leading up to, or right after we adopted Augsburg 150, we talked a lot about our institutional culture, and we affirmed that we are a culture of purpose and caring. And I believe that is a beautiful and rare thing, and not something to squander or in any way diminish. But the community affirmed in almost every room to which we took this conversation that we needed to become more of a culture of learning and results. And so we linked this initiative to culture change as well as to decisions, because it's about what comes naturally when we think about the decisions that we need to make. And we haven't always thought naturally about evidence, because in fact, we haven't had easy access to it, even though Augsburg puts out more data on more things than almost any institution I know of under university reports. It's hard to fish through it and to focus on what's really relevant for the decisions. So I want to mention two additional projects that are not on this slide that we were able to complete this past year that may be of interest to this particular group. One is that our University Committee on Academic Planning is implementing next fall a periodic review of program sustainability to run in tandem with our periodic program reviews, the self-studies that departments do. The purpose of that is to actually engage in ongoing conversation, healthy dialogue and conversation about what, trends that we see over time in our programs, whether they are exciting and positive or whether they're concerning, so that we all can partner together in trying to figure out what our next steps are in the face of maybe declining enrollment or issues like that. So it's designed to keep us from having to use the next policy, which was also developed this year by a faculty group, which is a protocol for program opening and closing that was forwarded to the Faculty Senate in the final weeks of the semester and received by them as enthusiastically as it was by me. And that is a rare thing, I can tell you. Having come from an institution that still, I think, hasn't approved the policy it was proposing back in 2013 at the time that I left. So I didn't think it was actually going to be possible for this group of faculty to do, but they did. And I'm just so pleased and proud of them. And I want to share one other thing with this group while I'm on this line, because in the Academic Affairs Committee last week, we had a conversation between 12 or 15 faculty and the board members on that committee about what this past year has been like. And there were a few of them who actually called out that as challenging as this was, for all the reasons that Paul was talking about earlier, they really appreciated being part of some of these task forces that were pushing ahead in this other area as well, because it kept them connected to their colleagues and to, well, I don't know if they said the administration, but I heard it the administration, so kept them connected as well. Okay, so TJ, we can go on to the next and final area. So this final piece in the right-hand corner, the Task Force on Academic Structure, continued its work that was begun the year before this last one, continued this last year, and concluded with this recommendation that we move from our current, what I would call one college structure, with two divisions that was well suited to liberal arts colleges in the mid-20th century, to a two-college model. And as a faculty member who, if I were to mention their name, you would all recognize, said when we presented our work to the faculty, we would not have chosen our current structure if in the mid-20th century we had been the complex university that we are today. So what I would suggest to you about this two-college model, and TJ, we can advance to the next slide here, is that it doesn't answer every question for us. In fact, it doesn't answer very many, but one particular question that it does answer is that each area is freed up with a higher degree of autonomy and self-determination relative to its own needs and priorities to determine just what those priorities are and to act on them in the context, of course, of being part of one university. So we're aware that our possible risk here is siloization, and we need to be conscious of that and work against it as we can. I mean, we're a small community and a connected community. But this particular recommendation leaves open questions of how each college, if we move in this direction, would be designed. And that is part of the work ahead that the deans and the faculty will be taking up over the next 6 months or so. And it should, I hope, be a design that helps us do our best work and meets our highest priorities in both of those areas. The proposed change has the advantage of aligning with how leadership roles and responsibilities have in fact evolved at Augsburg over the last decade or so. It requires no new deans, at least in its initial iteration, and at least not without donor funding, which might create, say, a named school in a college of professional studies. And it creates an opportunity to bring new clarity to what we think the roles of department chair, program director, and division chair should be to best meet our needs. I should point out that those two circles in the middle were not actually, they're really hard to read. The print is too small for me too. We have other versions of this that you can look at. One is the Center for Adult Learning and Continuing Education that I linked earlier to the work of the Grow Sustainably Task Force. And the other is the Office of Planning and Effectiveness that I linked earlier to the HLC initiative. So those are represented here because they came forward in the context of those other initiatives. So that concludes my report, I think. I guess I want to leave you again with this sense that all of this work was really facilitated and fueled by the interconnectedness of doing the work together, as challenging as that turned out to be in this most challenging of academic years. But it was well positioned by the robustness, I think, of our strategic plan, which provided a framework for us to continue to do this work. So that concludes my presentation or my part of this. And so, Paul, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Karen. I just, again, to affirm this remarkable body of work that really truly sets the foundation for our work going forward. So thanks for that. I'm going to close then, before we open it up for questions, with just some news about some members of our community who are departing, retiring, or leaving us. And it's a fairly significant number of people. And so I've just make you aware of people that you've known, perhaps that you've worked with in your time at Augsburg. So if we can go to the next slide, TJ. One more. So these are the retiring full-time faculty. Lars Christensen, who's leaving us from the sociology department. Wes Ellenwood, communication studies, film, new media. Doug Green, after 35 years in English, who gave just beautiful kind of final first word at the final faculty meeting, as well as wrote a beautiful poem to share with us for that. So next slide. Russell Cleckley is retiring in religion and philosophy. Barbara Lehman, longtime in social work. Cheryl Looning, in nursing, been with us almost 20 years in nursing. Next slide. Eileen Nuzarek, who helped to form the Health, Physical Education, Exercise Science program, and then Barbara West in education. So what an amazing group of folks. And then on to the next slide, we also have some folks here who have been with us not quite as long as others, but still important members of our community. Mark Ghost, who came to us with the Clinical PsyD program when it came from Argosy and joined Augsburg here a couple years ago. Suzanne Gikas in education, Holly Levine in physician assistant studies. Sarah Myers in theater has decided to leave us. Dale Peterson is stepping out, retiring from biology. Alan Tuchtenhagen, who took over for Norma and leading the Master of Arts and Leadership Studies program, is also retiring. And then we have these longtime staff members that we're also honoring as they step out. So Diane Detloff, many of you know, was the kind of office coordinator for the Center for Wellness and Counseling. And then Nancy Gabeau, who has been for 31 years, I believe, the director of the Center for Wellness and Counseling. Mary Laurel True, who all of us know, such a beloved colleague from the Sable Center for Democracy and Citizenship, and then Sharon Wade, who has been the office administrator for the nursing department and was one of the first people I met when the nursing program was actually in the office next to mine when I first arrived in 2006. So a remarkable group of individuals who are stepping out, and we are honoring them. In fact, over the next couple of days, there are parties for Diane and Nancy and Mary, and so we're doing everything we can to really applaud them as they leave us. So I think that concludes our formal presentation. Oh, I guess they always want me to say something about philanthropy. I'm happy to do that. We've had a good year. One of the things we found was that donors, even though we were contacting them, through Zoom and other means, really stepped up and continued to, especially focus in on the needs that were most obvious during this year. So we did reach 100 new endowed scholarships this year, which was a process we've been in as part of the campaign that we're in. As you know, we're establishing the Critical Race and Ethnic Studies program. That search process is underway for faculty members for that right now, but we received a remarkable $500,000 commitment to help fund that program, both some scholarship support as well as research support. We had a great Give to the Max Day back. We continue to use that day to bring together all kinds of projects that help to raise money in the kind of aggregate for Augsburg. We received a lot of funding for both the Student Emergency Fund as well as for a strategic fund that has been set up that gives me some discretion for, I think there was almost $500,000 raised for that. And then the Augsburg Women Engage, has continued to raise support for our Campus Cupboard. One of the challenges we've had in the neighborhood is a lot of food insecurity, and the Campus Cupboard folks both on campus and then Campus Kitchen, which is also kind of connected to that, which does work out in the community. Those two efforts have really been able to step in and lean into those challenges and to provide food and nutrition for both our students as well as our neighbors. So, okay. So I think that is the last slide, and we'll open it up. So I guess Sarah's going to facilitate. I think we're going to use the chat, I guess, if folks have questions for Karen or for me or. Maybe while we're waiting to see if you have some questions, I might just say a quick word about a couple things that planning for next fall that are important to us. Certainly, I think all of us are keeping track of what's going on with the vaccines, and we have been doing a great deal to make sure that our campus community could really get the vaccine. So we have great partnership with the People Center across the street. There's a lot of our students have been able to go over there, our faculty, staff, been able to get that. We also have been running clinics done at Central Lutheran as part of our Health Commons work. So the question about mandating vaccines is still one that we're looking at lots of different perspectives on that. So it looks like we have a couple questions coming up. I can go to the chat here. Karen, do you want to say a little bit about the CRES and what's going on there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for that question, Bev. So we're currently searching for 3 faculty positions, one that would center on Pan-African studies, one that centers on Asian American, and one that centers on Latinx, but could be open to people who would bring both interdisciplinary expertise, very current knowledge of the interconnectedness of those areas as ethnicity studies. And so we are in the final stages, really, of that search. I think the search committee is currently interviewing final candidates and is very pleased with the depth of the pool in each of those 3 areas. And then we'll be recommending, of course, 3 to come to campus virtually, or engage with other members of the community by the end of May and possibly the first week in June. So we were later, of course, launching than many faculty searches are, but we think that we have a lot to offer candidates working in this area. And certainly there's been resounding support from our students for this new program as well, and a vision of how it can be a catalyst for Augsburg as we continue to sort of live into the promise of our commitments around equity and inclusion. So that's where we are. You know, our vision, we have a skeletal framework of a curriculum kind of set up. I don't know that we will be positioned to launch right into knowing what a full degree program looks like next year. We really need these new faculty to help us design what that major looks like. But we do have some courses that have been approved through AAC that can be offered next year that would become part of that kind of major. So I guess it just depends sort of how much they come with and how quickly we get started. But I'm already fielding questions from students who want either to minor or major in this new degree program.
One of the interesting coincidences that the session that I mentioned, the Interrogating Our Institutional Saga session this morning, was actually led by Stuart Van Cleve from our archive, who did a presentation about the One Day in May back in 1968, and had shared with us some of the archival material, including the list of demands that students had made after that event. And those 11 demands included essentially the creation of a critical race, and it wasn't called that at that point. But we are in many ways, certainly a long time in, but we are keeping our promise, I think, in what we're committed to with this program. And so I also would note that as we share those materials, and in fact, the whole program for the One Day in May and May 15th, 1968, I noticed that, Norma, that you were one of the moderators for one of the panels. So that happened during that thing. So we may be coming around to chat with you a little bit, maybe an oral history that would allow us to know a little bit more about what it was like to be on the ground that day. So a couple of questions here that are related to finances. So from Tony, update on salaries. So as you know, the most difficult decisions we made coming into this year is that as of June 1, we had suspended contributions to our 403B program, the TIAA-CREF program, as well as reducing faculty staff salaries. It was phased over, depending on what level of income folks were, but everybody made some sacrifice there. And so, so I think that what I can tell you is that we were very happy, mainly because we received some of the federal funds. We were able to restore all faculty and staff salaries as of February 1st. So those now are back to their previous year levels. And then we will restore all retirement benefits as of June 1. So that's in the budget going forward. So those, we're getting everything back to where it was last year. There also likely will be a salary increase going into next year. Once again, I've got activity here at the house. So, and then there's a question from Bill about the dollar amount that we received. So that was a total of about 16 million, Bill. So the way it came, it was 3.2 million, back in last April, I guess, and half of that went directly to students, and the other half went to institutional needs. Then in December, we received about almost 5 million. And 1.6 of that went directly to students. And then about 3.3 or so went to institutional needs. And then the latest, the American Rescue Act, we received almost 9 million, half of which is going to students. And then the other half is for institutional needs. And so overall about 16 million, but it was divided depending on the criteria that were there. And for the student pieces, it was basically a pass-through. So they had to make application, and then we were able to provide that support for them. So it was I think really helped to meet some really important needs that students had during this year. So back a year or so, how many faculty staff were furloughed? So furloughs, I think that in the end, the total number of furloughs that we had last summer was about 30, if I remember. I think there were about 30 folks that were on furloughs, some of which they actually they chose to go on furlough. And that had to do with work that just couldn't be done. So we did maintain health benefits for those folks. And at this point, all those folks have come back. And most of them returned as we went into the fall semester. So it was really a summer kind of focus that we had for those furloughs. So all of those folks are back. The retirements they're certainly significant, but again, on the staff side, we're filling all those positions. The faculty, of course, as you know, as we get retirements there, they go into a process that Karen manages, thinking a little bit about how the needs of departments can be met going forward. So I don't think I would say that we've seen a diminution of core faculty and staff. It certainly was a tough year, no doubt about that. I mean, we will certainly all admit to it being a tough year, but I think we come out of it feeling pretty positive about the future. So, right, no faculty were furloughed. The analytics question from Bev: how will you measure belonging, inclusion, anti-racism? Karen?
Well, we do some student surveys, and we collect evidence through student, encounters with various offices on campus. But it's a great question, Bev, and it's not something that I think we have built up a very sort of robust process around, and it would be very difficult anyway. It's sort of anecdotal to the large degree, what we hear and what students report to us, or report to their advisors or to their faculty. I think that how we're going to measure it for Grow Sustainably Task Force is by retention of students. Like, how many choose to stay? Do the demographic breakdown of who chooses to stay change as a result of being able to support the diverse, populations of students who are on campus and make sort of people feel welcome and at home and included. And that's an issue for some of our faculty, by the way, as well. Faculty of color in particular, who spoke to that last week at the Academic Affairs Committee meeting. So we realized that we were on a journey, and every time I have a conversation with somebody from another institution, I realize how much further along on that journey we are than most other institutions, and yet we're not at the end of that journey yet. So, but a great question, and hope that as we expand the capacity of our Office of Planning and Effectiveness, they can help us think through some of the ways that we could perhaps measure that and track on that. Great question.
I just say a word, certainly on the inclusion and anti-racism work. One of the things there is both what we're doing for individuals in terms of their own growth, and so the use of the IDI, which is now being mandated across the institution. The mandatory anti-racism training that we had this year. I mean, we set these baselines by at least putting in place the certificate program that Joanne runs. And then a lot of what we've been doing, what we do with the IDI work is that we actually can actually capture aggregate growth as an institution through the IDI work. And we have been tracking on that, testing it about every 3 years or so. And to be quite honest, we have grown, which is good news. I mean, I think we're seeing movement in the right direction there. I would hope for the kind of investment we've made. So lead person for the HLC work.
I think that would be me.
Yeah.
I'm the one whose name is signed the proposal. And so I am overseeing that process. And part of, expanding the Office of Planning and Effectiveness is to hire somebody in academic analytics who will take a sort of primary responsibility for that on the ground. And as part of the proposal, we had to develop a set of goals and metrics on how we're actually going to assess ourselves as we go. So we did a lot of that work sort of front loaded. So we go into it. I'm sure there will be changes and adaptations and modifications, but I feel like I'm the one who needs to own it. The provost needs to own it and have responsibility for that and accountability.
Wonderful. Any other questions?
I have a couple of questions.
Great.
First, with the two-college model, how will you maintain the connection of the arts and professional studies? Because I think it's very important. As one who came out of professional studies, I think it's very important to keep that connection.
Great question. Well, I think that, what I think the two-college model does is add a space for the kind of deliberations that faculty may want in arts and sciences or in professional studies, but the structures we have in place for the entire institution remain in place as well. So it's not that those opportunities go away, and that's just structural. But, Paul and I sent out this call for innovation grants this summer because we're seeking faculty and staff teams who are interested in thinking about crossing those office or divisional or disciplinary boundaries and barriers. So I think that the way that we need to do that will complement some of the new structure we're putting into place, but it's very important that we preserve that, as you note. It's one of the things that has impressed me about Augsburg in the time I've been here is the degree to which faculty in the professional studies hold the liberal arts near and dear to their own hearts, and that faculty in the arts and sciences understand the importance of preparing their students for success after Augsburg as first destination jobs, mid-career and late career. So thanks for that question.
Another question.
Yeah.
What is the status of American Indian Studies now?
Well, we still have an American Indian Studies program. It is by design and intention that it is not structurally folded in to the new Critical Race and Ethnicity Studies Department, because that program and the working group of faculty who helped come up with the vision for the Critical Race and Ethnicity Studies program felt that, given the unique history of American Indians in this country, we needed to keep the visibility of that space intact. And the methodologies, I'm not an expert now in the methodologies of CRESS, or Critical Race and Ethnicity Studies, or American Indian Studies for that matter, but the methodologies differ too. And so they wanted to preserve that distinction, even though I imagine there will be a close alignment and lots of collaboration between American Indian Studies, which is interdisciplinary, perhaps in a different way than the way that Critical Race and Ethnicity Studies will be interdisciplinary.
This will be challenging. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, if there are no other questions, hi Tony. I see Tony's wearing the colors there. He's got the swag on. I appreciate that. So, anything else? Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and thanks for your continuing interest. I can't wait for us to get back and be able to have the hosted gatherings on campus that Gary, led for so many years. And I'm hoping that in the fall, if we're all vaccinated and we can create safe spaces for people to come back, we'll have a chance to do that. Maybe if not in the fall, maybe in the winter. So anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Great to see you. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Good to see you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.